After 8 years in a long-distance relationship with Grace Miller, I decided to propose to her. I quit my job, secretly bought a plane ticket to her city, and imagined countless times what our happy life together would look like. But when I saw her, she was nestled in another man's arms, smiling shyly. She said she only saw the man as a brother, but they lived together while I was asked to sleep in the guest room. I threw the ring into the trash and broke up with her on the spot. The next time we met, I had become their boss. Grace Miller cried and apologized, saying she wanted to go back to how things were before. Sitting in the cramped economy seat, I didn't feel uncomfortable at all. Instead, I was filled with joy, endlessly imagining Grace Miller's reaction when she saw me. After the plane landed, I went straight to the building where Grace Miller worked. Standing outside the bustling entrance, the familiar figure I had missed so dearly came into view. "Grace Miller," I shouted, waving. As I ran up to her, I suddenly froze. A cold-looking man stood beside her, his arm around her. His face was full of confusion. Grace Miller looked a bit uneasy. I hesitated before calling her again. "Grace Miller." Before she could respond, a young woman next to her hooked an arm around her shoulder, her tone teasing, sizing me up. "Grace, who's this handsome guy? Better be careful, or Chris Anderson will get jealous." The air seemed to freeze. I looked at the man. He was staring right back. Grace Miller turned to the young woman and said, "Don't talk nonsense. Go ahead. I'll catch up with you another day." The young woman pouted, walked down the steps, and kept glancing back at me. Grace Miller turned her gaze back to me, looking slightly surprised. "What are you doing here?" In that moment, I felt like an outsider. The man moved closer to her. Countless thoughts rushed through my mind. Finally, I was certain that man was Chris Anderson, the one the young woman had mentioned, and there was nothing simple about his relationship with Grace. "Can't I come?" I asked. Grace frowned slightly and rubbed her nose. "It's not that. I'm just busy today. I'll contact you later." Then she pulled Chris Anderson into a cab. Before getting in, she looked back at me. Just a glance. She said nothing. Then she got in, closed the door, and the cab drove off quickly. I stood alone in the cold wind, dragging my suitcase. It wasn't until a withered leaf fell on my head that I snapped out of it. I still had the key to Grace Miller's apartment. 3 years ago, after buying the place, she gave me a key once the renovations were done, saying it was our home, even though I didn't like the black, white, and gray decor. But back then, Grace's eyes sparkled. She held my hand tightly and showed me around the apartment. While walking, she described our future. "This room is for our baby. That one's my vanity, and this will be your gaming room." I felt nothing but happiness. Then 3 years passed, and now standing at that door again, I froze with the key in my hand. She had changed the lock to an electronic one. I tried my fingerprint twice. It failed both times. The mechanical voice warned me the system would lock if I failed again. I hesitated, looking at the keypad. I bit my lip and entered the date we started dating. Still wrong. A wave of anxiety surged through me. I suddenly felt helpless and crouched by the door. Just crouched there quietly, my mind blank until I heard laughter nearby. Chris Anderson was playfully tapping Grace's shoulder. He was laughing brightly, completely unaware of me. Grace stopped at the stairwell, and Chris followed her gaze straight to me. "What are you doing here?" Grace asked. My heart tightened. I felt something being torn away. "When did you change the lock?" I got straight to the point. Grace didn't answer. She turned to Chris Anderson, then lifted her hand. Chris quickly pressed his finger on the scanner. Ding! The lock opened. I stood frozen. I wanted to leave, but my feet felt glued to the ground. "Come in," Grace said softly, pulling my suitcase inside. I watched as Chris Anderson calmly turned on the lights, changed his shoes, took off his coat, and walked into the bathroom to wash his hands as if he were the man of the house. Grace noticed the look on my face and cleared her throat. "He's the son of a friend of my mom's. I've always seen him as a brother. My mom's friend is doing business overseas and asked me to take care of him for a while." A brother? My instincts didn't buy it. Next second, Chris Anderson spoke up with dissatisfaction. "I'm her blind date." Grace panicked. "Stop messing around. Go rest." She hurriedly pushed Chris toward the master bedroom. Once the door closed, she turned around. Rubbing her hair in frustration, she said, "You came, all of a sudden. I wasn't prepared. You can sleep in the guest room tonight." She dragged my suitcase toward the guest room. I followed, catching a glimpse of the master bedroom door, slightly ajar, with Chris Anderson standing behind it, watching. Grace shut the door, cutting off his prying gaze. But from my angle, it looked like she was shielding him, protecting him behind that door. A sour ache surged from my chest, tightening my throat. She lowered her voice deliberately. "You know, my mom has never approved of us. I held on for years. Chris is my mom's friend's son. She insisted on setting us up. He's 5 years older than me and treats me like a kid, always bossing me around. Don't take it to heart." I swallowed hard, struggling to control my emotions. "How long has he been living here?" 2.5 years. Those 4 words hit like a bolt from the blue. Grace Miller quickly added, flustered. "He doesn't live here all the time. He goes back home for a few months every now and then." I stared at her, unsure what to say. My mind was a chaotic mess. "Michael," Don't overthink it. I'm going out now. If I stay, he'll start lecturing me again." With that, Grace left the room. In the dim light, the sound of my breathing was all I could hear. Then Chris Anderson's impatient voice came through the door, followed by Grace's nervous, placating tone. "I saw him in your photo album," he said. "You told me he wouldn't come back," he added. "He's leaving in a few days," Grace explained. "Don't be mad. I promise." "Okay," she pleaded. As I listened to the voices outside, I thought about every video call we had in the past 3 years. Grace Miller never called me from home. Most of the time, she was in a bathroom at work. She said she was too busy and would fall asleep as soon as she got home. Once or twice, I'd heard a man's voice in the background. When I asked, she said it was the TV, and I believed her. Looking back now, I was so easy to deceive. I don't know how I made it through that night. Just one thought kept circling in my head. I have to leave this place for good. End everything with Grace Miller. Sunlight streamed through the curtains onto the bed. I packed my things and walked out to the living room. Chris Anderson was carrying a bowl of hot soup. When he saw me, his expression shifted. "Michael Evans, right? Can you give me a hand?" Without thinking, I walked over. The moment I reached out, he tipped the scalding soup directly onto my right hand. "Ah!" Chris Anderson yelled before I could. I gasped sharply as the bowl shattered on the floor. A shard of ceramic pierced my shin, and the sharp pain spread like fire. Tears sprang from my eyes. "Chris!" Grace Miller cried out, rushing over. She grabbed Chris's hand, her face filled with worry. "Are you okay?" Just as I opened my mouth to explain, Chris cut me off. He looked down, his face somber. "I just wanted to bring Michael Evans a bowl of soup. He said he didn't want it," and raised his hand. "It's all my fault." He even let out a long sigh. Grace's eyes flared in anger. She turned on me and screamed. "I told you I only see him as a brother. Why can't you let it go?" Her yelling startled me. The Grace Miller before me was a stranger. When we were long distance, she always spoke gently through the phone. Now she sounded just like a woman throwing a tantrum on the street. Before I could say anything, Grace stormed out with Chris Anderson. The pain in my leg and hand pulled me back to reality. The burn on my hand needed urgent treatment, and the bleeding from my leg was not minor. Gritting my teeth, I forced myself up, ran cold water over my hand, slathered it with toothpaste, and hobbled downstairs to hail a cab. At the hospital, the nurse gasped when she saw me and quickly helped me get registered for emergency care. After a round of treatment, my right hand was bandaged. A ceramic shard had to be removed from my shin, which required 3 stitches. In a wheelchair, I was rolled into the corridor just in time to see Grace Miller carefully helping Chris Anderson out of the exam room next door. She turned and saw me, her face first stunned, then cold. "Michael Evans, I didn't think you'd be this jealous. Chris's hand is burned. He can't touch water for a while. Happy now?" Her accusations came like a slap, tearing into my heart like invisible claws. I looked at Chris Anderson's hand, just a square bandage about the size of a bank card. Then I looked at myself. One pant leg rolled up, my shin wrapped in thick gauze. My right hand was bandaged so heavily it looked like a boxing glove. "Grace Miller, you think my injuries are minor?" I asked, choking on my words. Grace looked me over, then curled her lips in a mocking smile. "You deserved it." She turned and walked away with Chris Anderson in her arms. I watched their backs retreat. Chris glanced over his shoulder, smirking triumphantly like a winner. Thunder cracked outside, and soon rain poured over the hospital. I bought a cane and borrowed a hospital umbrella, hobbling toward the main entrance. To my surprise, Chris Anderson was standing there. He looked at me and sneered. "See? Just a small burn, and she freaks out. You're in a wheelchair, and she won't even look at you. If you've got any sense, pack your things and leave. Don't ruin what we have." I stayed quiet, looking down as I pulled out my phone to call a car. At that moment, a black Mercedes pulled up. Grace Miller stepped out of the driver's seat with an umbrella. She froze when she saw me, then calmly opened the umbrella over Chris Anderson, shielding him as he got into the passenger seat. "Come with us. It's raining," Grace said gently to Chris. Then she looked at me coldly. "Get in." I glanced at the ride-hailing queue. There were still 120 people ahead of me. After weighing my options, I climbed into the car. Grace didn't offer me the umbrella, so I had to protect my injuries as best I could from the rain. By the time I got seated, the rest of me was already half soaked. The car sped down the highway, Cantonese pop music playing softly. Chris Anderson hummed along, singing. He sang with deep emotion, and during the chorus, Grace Miller chimed in from time to time. They looked just like a couple in love. I felt all the more out of place in the back seat. "Michael, can I call you that?" Chris Anderson asked, with feigned curiosity. "What brings you here this time?" I looked down, my left hand in my pocket, rubbing the engagement ring I had prepared. A bitter taste rose in my chest. "Nothing much, just visiting." After I said that, Chris Anderson beamed with satisfaction. He was clearly pleased with my answer and turned back to singing along with the music. I looked up into the rearview mirror, catching glimpses of Grace Miller's conflicted expression. Our eyes met briefly before she quickly looked away. The car pulled into an underground parking garage and came to a stop. Grace Miller stepped out from the driver's seat and jogged around the front of the car. A part of me hoped she'd come over to help me out, but she stopped at the passenger side. She opened the door, one hand shielding the roof, the other on the doorframe. "Careful," she said gently, her tone a far cry from the one she used to scream at me in the hospital. Once Chris Anderson stood steadily, he glanced back at me. "Michael," he hurt his leg. "Grace, go help him." Grace Miller shot me a look of disgust. "He can manage, let's go upstairs." Then she walked off, supporting Chris Anderson. I took a deep breath and swallowed instinctively. Strange, why did my saliva taste so bitter? Frowning, I opened the door, pushed it open with my cane, and hobbled out of the car with awkward, clumsy movements. I limped toward the elevator. Grace Miller's annoyed voice greeted me. "We missed 2 elevators because of you." I didn't respond. My head bowed, stomach churning with bitter acid, nausea rising. "Grace, don't say that. Michael's injured, too," Chris Anderson said, nudging her gently. Grace instantly softened and hugged him with concern. Okay, don't move around too much." I felt like a clown, silently watching someone else's happiness. When the elevator arrived, Grace held the door for Chris and warned him to watch his step. After he stepped in, I followed closely behind, but Grace let the door go. She calmly pressed the floor number as if nothing had happened. I stood in the corner in silence. Not a word was spoken until we entered the apartment. Grace helped Chris get settled, then came to the guest room. "How's your injury?" she asked. "The doctor said to keep it dry. Stitches come out next Monday," I answered flatly. "You came all this way just for fun. What about work? You can't take a vacation forever, right?" I froze, looking up into her impatient eyes. I had already quit my job before coming here. When I handed him my resignation, the chairman himself had tried hard to convince me to stay, saying I was the most promising employee he'd ever seen. Grace and I had studied the same major in university. After graduation, she stayed in W City while I moved to Y City to chase my dreams. We had promised to meet again at the top, but Grace's growing indifference made me panic. I was afraid of losing her, so I quit my job and came to propose. I never expected things would turn out like this. I thought she was enduring the same loneliness I was, but she had long been in another man's arms. Suddenly, I laughed. The sound echoed awkwardly in the quiet room. What was I laughing at? Maybe at myself. Before I could speak, Chris Anderson's voice rang out. "Grace, I'm hungry." Grace immediately turned and responded, "Okay, I'll cook something." She cast one last complicated look at me before turning and walking out the door. All the words I had been about to say were left hanging in the air. A few minutes later, the smell of food filled the air. Grace called me to come eat. By the time I sat down, she had already peeled a bowl of shrimp and set it naturally in front of Chris Anderson. Chris made a delighted sound and opened his mouth. Grace smiled fondly and fed him a piece of shrimp. Their interaction was sweet and natural. That level of ease between them reminded me this had clearly been going on for a while. I picked up the chopsticks with my left hand, struggling to grab a mushroom from the plate. Halfway there, the mushroom fell on the table. Grace let out a loud, annoyed TSK. Chris gave me a glance and said, "Michael, use my fork." He passed me a silver fork, but Grace took it from him and placed it back in front of Chris. "Use your own," she said flatly. Then she went into the kitchen and brought me a disposable fork. I lowered my head and gave a bitter smile. In this house, I was the temporary guest. The meal dragged on endlessly. Grace and Chris were glued together, whispering and smiling. I just kept my head down, silently eating food that tasted like ash. After dinner, Grace cleaned the table, tended to Chris, and finally came into the guest room. She sat down at the edge of the bed. "Chris is like a brother to me. Did you come here this time for something important?" As she asked, she reached out and took my left hand, her warmth wrapping around my palm. I was dazed for a moment. The Grace Miller in front of me seemed like the one I used to know. "If you want to get married, my mom's still not quite there yet," she said. "Can we wait a bit longer? You're a vice president now. Once you become CEO, maybe she'll come around." I didn't answer right away. I just stared at her. I kept staring until I was certain. The familiarity I felt just now was an illusion. Or maybe the version of Grace Miller who once loved me had never truly existed. I took a deep breath and slowly spoke. "I quit my job." After I finished speaking, Grace Miller froze for a long moment, then let go of my hand. She stood up, hands on her hips, and began pacing the room. "Why didn't you talk to me first? Most of Y City's resources are controlled by your company. If you became CEO and we teamed up, we could have everything we ever wanted. You resigned without telling me. What am I supposed to do now? Marriage? Forget it." The more she spoke, the more agitated she became, her chest rising and falling heavily. She was just a low-level manager at her company. Yet, she dreamed of using my resources to climb her way to the top. Suddenly, I found this woman before me utterly ridiculous. I had waited for her for 8 whole years. In countless moments, when I needed her, I comforted myself. "I'm fine on my own. Be strong." Grace kept pacing circles around the room while I simply watched coldly. Abruptly, she stopped in her tracks. "Michael Evans, go back to Y City. Beg your chairman to let you return to work. If you do, I'll still consider marrying you." I curled my lips into a smirk. "Grace Miller, I'm not going back. We're breaking up." Grace stood frozen, disbelief written all over her face. "Grace." Chris Anderson was suddenly standing outside the door, calling her softly. Grace's irritated expression disappeared in an instant. She turned and replied in a gentle tone, "Chris, what's wrong?" I scoffed inwardly. Her emotional shift was faster than a face change in Sichuan opera. Chris lowered his head, sadness in his eyes. He was wearing matching pajamas with Grace. "I thought you said you and Michael had already broken up. Then why were you talking about marriage?" His voice was low and filled with hurt. Grace's face instantly softened with concern. She wrapped her arms around him and said sweetly, "You misheard. Come on, it's cold out here." With that, she led Chris Anderson away. I rolled my eyes behind their backs and started packing my things. An hour later, I was wheeling my suitcase to the front door when I locked eyes with Grace in the living room. She froze for a moment. I gave her a quick glance and pulled the door open. The rideshare driver was already waiting and cheerfully took my suitcase. "Sir, I have limited mobility." "Thank you," I said with a smile. Behind me, Grace clenched her fists. "Michael Evans, think carefully. If you walk out that door, we're over." I turned to her and spoke clearly, one word at a time. "Grace Miller, I'm the one breaking up with you." Then I turned to the driver. "Sir, let's go quickly, please." The driver looked between the two of us, immediately understanding the situation. He picked up my suitcase and headed out. I walked out with my cane, never looking back. Goodbye, Grace Miller, goodbye, my 8 years of youth. Sitting in the car to the airport, I stared out the window as the roadside greenery slid by. 8 years to see someone clearly. Was it worth it? But then again, if I hadn't come suddenly this time, maybe I'd have waited 10 or even 20 years before seeing the real Grace Miller. That would have been the real tragedy. Before I knew it, the car pulled up at the airport. The driver enthusiastically helped me with my luggage and patted my shoulder before leaving. "Brother, live well." He grinned brightly. I nodded firmly. "Yes, live well." I pulled the engagement ring from my pocket, walked to the trash can, and tossed it in without hesitation. The gleaming metal traced a perfect arc through the air before disappearing into the trash. Gone with it was that miserable relationship. I took a deep breath and hobbled toward security. This time, I bought myself a first-class ticket. When I came here, I tried to save money. After all, weddings cost a lot. Now, I couldn't help but laugh at myself. Lying in the plush seat, I drifted off into a nap. When the flight attendant woke me, the plane had landed. She kindly helped me out of the jet bridge and even found me a wheelchair. I was grateful and kept saying thank you. Back at my fully paid-off apartment, I finally relaxed. Sinking into the soft, familiar bed, I felt warm and at peace. Then I remembered to turn off airplane mode. The moment I connected to the internet, a flood of messages burst onto my screen. "Michael Evans, did you really leave? You want to end an 8-year relationship just like that? Didn't you want to marry me?" Grace Miller's texts bombarded me, making my head ache. I blocked her on the spot, and silence finally returned to my world. When I woke up, it was already noon the next day. My leg barely hurt anymore, healing surprisingly fast. I could walk around the house without the cane. 5 days later, I went to the hospital to have my stitches removed and happened to run into my former chairman. "Michael, why are you back? Finished your wedding already?" I was caught off guard, nervously clutching the hem of my shirt and forcing a smile. The chairman seemed to notice something. He handed me a business card. "My good friend runs this company. With your abilities, you'll be just fine. I'll give him a heads up." My nose stung with emotion. The chairman smiled and wished me well before walking off. I looked at the business card for a few seconds, stunned. It was the company where Grace Miller worked. Just then, someone bumped into me. "Sorry." A graceful and elegant woman kept apologizing. I shook my head. She looked like she was in a hurry, nodding as she ran into the elevator. I brushed off my jacket and headed home, ready to embrace a new challenge. Not long after I joined X Group, a transfer notice landed in my inbox. I couldn't help but laugh at fate's twists and turns. I was reassigned to W City as a vice president, and the new CEO who transferred with me, it was Hannah Moore, the woman who had bumped into me at the hospital that day. "Sorry, I was in a hurry to get back to the office that day." Hannah Moore apologized again on the plane. I gave her a faint smile. "It's okay." During the flight, I leaned back with my eyes closed. I could occasionally feel someone's gaze lingering on me, but sleepiness kept me from opening my eyes. After the plane landed, Hannah Moore gently tapped my arm. "Michael, we've arrived." I opened my eyes, groggy, and she handed me a tissue with a soft smile, her eyes fixed on the corner of my mouth. Suspicious, I brought the tissue to my mouth and instantly felt my cheeks flush. I had slept so soundly, I hadn't even realized I had drooled. "Sorry," I mumbled, lowering my head. Hannah let out a light laugh. "It's nothing." I followed behind her off the plane and arrived at the company-provided apartment, a riverside, high-rise. I lived one floor above Hannah Moore. She kindly helped move my luggage inside. "If you need anything, just call me." I nodded. She turned and disappeared into the elevator. The next morning was the company's welcome meeting. That's when I saw Grace Miller and Chris Anderson again, along with the playful young woman from the other day. Her name was Ella Davis. Grace's expression was dark and cold, her eyes fixed on me as I sat on stage. Chris Anderson's sharp, brooding gaze never left me either. The two of them looked almost identical at that moment. After the meeting, I vaguely overheard Ella Davis's panicked voice. "Oh my God, why didn't you tell me that guy was the group's new VP? And I said those things. I'm doomed." I curved my lips into a smile and slowly walked over to her. She shrank back like a frightened turtle, slowly inching behind Grace Miller. "Good day, Mr. Mang," Ella greeted nervously. Grace remained silent until Ella nudged her. Before Grace could speak, Hannah Moore suddenly appeared behind me. "You know them?" I turned to look at her. "Sort of." Then I gave Grace Miller a small smile and walked away. That day, there weren't any particularly challenging tasks at work. After work, I returned home to find Grace Miller waiting outside my door. She wore a designer dress, the same one I gave her as our 6th anniversary gift. "Michael," she called softly, stepping closer. Her breath reeked slightly of alcohol. "Michael, do you really want to break up with me?" she asked. I took a few steps back until my back was pressed against the cold door. "Grace Miller, we already broke up." As the words fell, Grace's eyes welled with tears as she grabbed my hand. I noticed a ring on her finger. It was a Cartier 1895 engagement ring. I recognized it instantly because it was the same model as the one I had thrown away. She noticed me staring at it and quickly looked flustered. "Just wearing it for fun," she mumbled. Judging from her reaction, I figured it was either a gift from Chris Anderson or part of a couple's ring set she had given him. Either way, it no longer mattered. "Michael, can we start over?" she pleaded. Before she could say more, Hannah Moore appeared behind her and cleared her throat softly. Grace immediately let go of my hand. When she turned and saw Hannah Moore's serious expression, she froze. She looked between the two of us before turning and fleeing in embarrassment. "Michael, are you okay?" Hannah asked. She glanced me over, checking that I wasn't hurt, then breathed a sigh of relief. Her concern made me chuckle. Hannah looked confused for a second, then a bit embarrassed as she averted her eyes. "I actually came up to ask if you had any extra plates." I ran out. I was a little surprised. Even a powerful woman like her cooked for herself. "I do." "Wait a moment, Director Moore." I opened the door and went into the kitchen to grab a few plates. Just as she took them from me, my phone buzzed repeatedly. Chris Anderson had sent me 7 photos. They showed him and Grace Miller being intimate, celebrating his birthday at home. Many people were present, including Ella Davis. "Mr. Michael, would you like to try my cooking?" Hannah Moore asked. I was momentarily stunned by the photos, but her voice brought me back. Snapping out of it, I nodded and followed her downstairs. The moment she opened her door, a mouth-watering aroma hit me, instantly awakening my appetite. Hannah kindly served me a bowl of soup. In my house, we drink soup before meals. "Give it a try." "Thank you." I accepted it eagerly. It was the perfect temperature. The flavor was light, yet rich with a meaty undertone. "Delicious." Hannah kept putting food on my plate while cheerfully explaining how she had cooked each dish. She even cracked a few jokes that had me laughing until my sides ached. It was an incredibly enjoyable meal. When she walked me back upstairs, Hannah stood at my door, her eyes soft and shining like spring water. "Shall we have dinner again sometime?" I pursed my lips slightly, still savoring the taste of the meal. "Absolutely," I answered without hesitation. Hannah beamed, then skipped into the elevator. I was stunned, mouth slightly open. Just then, my phone rang. It was Grace Miller's familiar voice. "Michael, I'll prove that I love you." It was eerily quiet on her end. I guess she had hidden in the bathroom to call me. "Grace Miller, you're celebrating Chris Anderson's birthday while trying to win me back. Doesn't that seem a bit inappropriate?" She was silent for a few seconds. I hung up. I remembered how before, Grace's calls after work were always very quiet. It wasn't until I moved into that apartment and discovered how well the bathroom insulated sound that I realized just how calculating Grace Miller had been. My work gradually settled into a steady rhythm. Eventually, I learned that Grace Miller and Chris Anderson worked in the same department. They had been together long before I ever found out 3 years ago. When we bought and renovated the apartment, Grace Miller had decorated everything to suit Chris Anderson's taste. I should have noticed it back then. As I sat at my desk, lost in thought, a cup of coffee was suddenly placed in front of me. I looked up. Hannah Moore was dressed casually today. "You can bring a partner to this weekend's team-building event." "Are you bringing someone?" she asked. I lowered my head, thinking for a moment. My parents were far away in Y City, and I had no relatives or close friends in W City. "I'm not." "What about you?" Hannah smiled, then turned and walked out of my office. The weekend arrived quickly. The event was deep in the mountains, a 2-day, 1-night trip. After playing some games during the day, we lit a bonfire at night. Grace Miller stayed close by my side the whole time, and Chris Anderson stuck to her like glue. It annoyed me. Chris Anderson kept looking at me like I was his mortal enemy. Unable to bear it, I slipped away from the crowd, staring into the dark valley, lost in thought. Michael, Grace Miller's voice sounded behind me. The distant firelight lit up the side of her face. Before she could say anything more, I was suddenly pulled into a hug. That familiar citrus scent filled my nose. Michael, the bonfire party is over. It's time to rest, Hannah Moore said softly. Grace's face turned pale the moment she heard that. I tried to pull away from Hannah, but she leaned into me calmly. What did she call you just now? You two have been together for a while, haven't you? Was that why you came last time? To break up with me? I noticed Grace's clenched fists and felt a twinge of unease. No, we just got together, I said, but Hannah Moore cut me off. She smiled gently. Facing Grace's increasingly dark expression, I lowered my head and said nothing. Grace, get some rest, Hannah said. With that, she held me close and led me toward the staff's tent area. I turned to look at Grace Miller. She stood in the darkness, her shoulders trembling slightly. Director Moore, you didn't have to defend me like that, I said. I wasn't defending you, Hannah said. I meant it. Her words left me stunned. Before leaving, she reminded me to get some rest, but my mind kept echoing with those words. I meant it. Before I could fully process it, things got noisy outside the tent. Chris Anderson and Grace Miller were arguing. I stood outside the crowd, listening to Chris Anderson shout in anguish. You just want to climb the ladder, don't you? When he was in Y City, he asked, why didn't you go after him then? As he spoke, he slapped Grace across the face, eyes red with fury. I spotted Ella Davis nearby. She tugged at Chris's sleeve, trying to stop him. Why are you pulling me? Am I wrong? Michael Evans resigned from his job in Y City and came here because he wanted to marry her. And what did she do? She strung him along for 8 years. Now that he's doing well, she wants to get back together. Then what am I? I stayed with her for 3 years. As Chris finished, whispers spread through the crowd. Someone noticed me in the back. All eyes immediately turned toward me. Feeling awkward, I cleared my throat. It's late. Everyone should head back and rest. People exchanged glances. With the vice president speaking, no one dared linger. Still, their gossip-loving instincts made them leave reluctantly, casting glances back as they went. Eventually, the crowd dispersed. I looked at Chris Anderson. His usually cold face was now twisted with rage. Michael Evans, you shouldn't have come back. You were doing fine on your own for 8 years. Why come back now and take her away? Tears welled up in his eyes. My heart wavered. He was right. I had been alone for 8 years. Suddenly, I felt a warm sensation in my palm. Hannah Moore had taken my hand. I'm here. You're not alone, she whispered gently. The mountain wind howled, but I didn't feel cold at all. Chris stared at us, especially at our joined hands. He sneered, then turned to Grace Miller, his voice dripping with scorn. See, Michael Evans is doing just fine without you, and you thought he was still hung up on you. Shut up, Grace shouted. Smack, a crisp slap echoed through the night. Chris Anderson fell to the ground, clutching his cheek, stunned. His mouth hung open, but no words came out as he stared blankly at Grace Miller. Her right hand was still trembling slightly. I moved as if to help Chris, but Hannah Moore held me back. She shook her head. It's late. Let's go to sleep. With that, Hannah linked arms with me and led me to the tent. I didn't look back. The wind howled louder and louder, mingled with the sound of Grace Miller's quiet sobbing. The team-building trip ended. On the ride back, I sat in the front passenger seat of Hannah Moore's car. She had deliberately asked the driver to step away. Michael, is it okay if I call you that? I know it's a little informal, but I can't wait anymore. I like you. Hannah was driving as she spoke. I turned to look at her green ears and couldn't help but laugh. Me, too. The blush on her ears spread to her cheeks. She motioned for me to open the glove box. Inside was a delicate box containing a Harry Winston ring. I was surprised. I took out the ring and slipped it onto my ring finger, holding it up to the sunlight. The diamond sparkled brilliantly. Car was playing my favorite songs, and Hannah hummed along to a few lines. Her eyes, when they looked at me, were filled with deep affection. At that moment, I felt blissfully happy. After returning, I moved from the upstairs unit to the downstairs one. As soon as I opened the door, I was greeted by a room full of balloons. In the middle of the living room, the word welcome made out of balloons stood prominently. I couldn't help but beam with joy. The next day at work, rumors were spreading about the personal drama between Grace Miller and Chris Anderson. I listened in quietly. 3 years ago, when Chris Anderson joined the company, he was assigned to Grace Miller's team. They often appeared together, and everyone assumed they were a couple. Chris Anderson had made quite a few enemies in the company, backed by Grace Miller's minor authority. He bullied colleagues in the same department and built a small clique. Ella Davis was his most loyal follower. After the incident during the team-building event, many believed that either Hannah Moore or I would fire the two of them. But I didn't, and neither did Hannah Moore. After the business stabilized, Hannah and I took our annual leave and traveled abroad. Unexpectedly, Grace Miller followed us. She waited outside our hotel, her voice calling out, "Michael." When I turned around, I saw her holding a bouquet of roses bright and vivid, drawing the attention of passersby. "What do you want?" I asked. Grace held out the bouquet, her tone pleading. "Can we get back together?" I let out a cold laugh. "Grace Miller, what makes you think I'd say yes?" Her face turned pale at my words. I looked her over and raised a hand, wearing my diamond ring. "Grace Miller, I already have a girlfriend. She cares for me, loves me, and most importantly, she would never betray me. You think you deserve me." Her pupils contracted. She shook her head, murmuring, "I don't believe you don't love me. 8 years of long distance, you never once argued with me. When I was sick, you sent me medicine. When I worked late, you ordered food for me. You even made snacks and mailed them to me. You did all that. I don't believe you just stopped loving me." I always thought those things I did meant nothing to her, but it turned out, she remembered. I took a step back and spoke coldly. "And what did you ever do for me? When I was sick, when I worked late, even when I got into a car accident? What were you doing then?" Grace was stunned. "A year ago, after working overtime, I was hit by a car that ran a red light on my way home. In despair, I called Grace 15 times. She didn't answer a single one. The next afternoon, she finally messaged me asking what happened. I replied from the hospital bed, 'I was in a car accident.' Her response was calm. 'Are you okay?' I instinctively said, 'I'm fine.' She said, 'That's good, I'm working,' and hung up. Back then, bitterness rose in my chest. I told myself maybe she was just really busy. Back in the present, I looked at Grace Miller standing in front of me. Her lips trembled. She didn't answer. "Michael." At that moment, Hannah Moore called out to me. She walked over and gently wrapped a scarf around my neck. "Don't catch a cold." Afterward, she turned to Grace, her eyes full of disdain. "Don't you know he's allergic to pollen?" With that, she looped her arm through mine and led me to the car. We left Grace Miller standing there alone. In the rearview mirror, I saw her slowly standing up. The bouquet in her hand had fallen to the ground. We drove off, leaving her far behind. With Hannah Moore in my arms, warm and soft, my heart felt at ease. "I made a reservation," she said gently. "They have your favorite moon clams." I looked at her, surprised. "How do you know I like those?" She smiled brightly with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "The first time you came to my place, you finished all 10 moon clams I made. The second time I made 10 more, and you cleaned the plate again. Guess how I figured it out?" Listening to her, my cheeks grew hot. After our trip, once we returned home, I received 2 pieces of news. First, Grace Miller had resigned. Second, Chris Anderson had been fired. Grace had voluntarily reported Chris for bullying coworkers and taking kickbacks. HR responded by immediately terminating Chris and recovering the company's losses. I stared out at the sunset, lost in thought. After work, I walked out of the building with Hannah Moore. Grace Miller stood in front of us, looking desolate. She took a step forward. About to speak, I held Hannah close, not even glancing at Grace, and walked straight to the driver's seat. Once I sat down, Hannah leaned over and kissed my cheek. "What was that for?" I asked, confused. Hannah grinned slightly, marking my territory. Only then did I notice Grace standing not far from the car, staring at me intently. But as the car started and we drove away, she was left far behind. I turned to Hannah and planted a big kiss on her cheek. She laughed sweetly. I had a feeling that from now on, life would always be this way.